Welcome to Sarah's Tent. Glad you could join me tonight.
Hi, Sandy. Great to be here with you.
For those who might be listening to this later after it's posted, the reason we're calling this in Sarah's Tent is a couple of reasons. First, because Sarah is a matriarch, a righteous woman, and her tent was always open to visitors. She and Abraham were very hospitable. That was one of their major traits. And in our logo, we have a tent with the flaps of the tent open to recognize her hospitality. And we've also got a candle in that tent. And that represents the fact that we have read in commentaries and midrash that a candle burned in Sarah's tent from Sabbath to Sabbath. So we kind of wanted to incorporate that into our logo. So with that said, let's go into Sarah's tent and see what we find.
Well, we're going to be reading from the Torah, and we're going to be starting at the beginning with Genesis 1:1. And just our plan is just to read it and then talk about it, and then read some more and talk some more. So that's our plan. And I'm going to be reading from the Art Scroll. I'm going to be using the Stone edition. If you want to read along, you can. There are other translations, but we're going to be following the English in the Stone edition by Art Scroll.
Okay, thanks, Nancy.
All right, so Genesis 1:1 is where we'll start. In the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth, when the earth was astonishingly empty, with darkness upon the surface of the deep, and the divine presence hovered upon the surface of the waters, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated between the light and the darkness. And God called the light day, and to the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning one day. God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it separate between water and water." So God made the firmament and separated between the waters which were beneath the firmament and the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And there was evening and there was morning a second day.
Hey, thank you, Nancy. Is anything in particular that jumped out at you that you would like to bring up?
Well, I wanted to make a note that in the beginning, God created everything. Everything was there in the initial creation. As we'll see as we read on, he makes things from what is already there, but everything
Yeah,
was there at the beginning.
yeah, good point.
For example, well, we'll read that as we go on. But also, I wanted to say something about the light, the one that was created on the first day.
Right.
So, if there was already light on the first day, later on in I think it's day 4, he creates the sun and the moon. So, what happened to this first light? And I found two answers to that question. One is from the Ramban. He says that when Hashem made the rakia, which is translated firmament, could also mean kind of like the atmosphere around the earth. on the second day, it blocked out the light that he created the first day. And the light was on top of the rakia and could no longer be seen on earth. Hashem
Okay.
therefore made the sun and the moon to give light to the earth. And then the second answer that I found was in a midrash. The light that Hashem created on the first day would have been too strong for the human beings to bear. Hashem therefore hid it for the tzaddikim, or the righteous ones, in the future, and gave us the sun and the moon instead. So that was what I read about the light that was created on the first day.
Very interesting, Nancy. And I don't know if there's a connection, but it made me think when you said that the light was too intense or too bright, or the non-righteous people could not bear it. It would be too overpowering. Made me think of Moses when he came down from the mountain and his face was glowing. His face had to be concealed because they could not tolerate it. So, don't know if that in Genesis is a little hint of what might be coming, or are we looking for connections that aren't there? But that's what it made me think of, that sometimes things are too bright for us where we are at this time.
Very good point. And I had forgotten about that Moses had to wear a veil
Or a
because
veil.
he glowed.
Yeah, he glowed. Actually, I've heard one translation say that it was rays coming from his face. So interesting. One thing I noticed in that, Nancy, is you and I have been learning Hebrew, learning to read Hebrew for some time now. And in the Hebrew, in verse 5, it says, God called the light day and the darkness he called night. But when we read it in the actual Hebrew, it says, Va'ikra Elohim Laor Yod, Yom, and La Hoshek Va'ikra Lila. And it actually says he called to the light and he called to the darkness. And I was reading in our commentary that it talks about that. It says that God summoned the light and appointed it for duty by day, and he summoned the darkness and appointed it for duty at night. So when I've just read that in the past, I thought he was naming the light day and he was naming the darkness night. But when we read it as it literally is in the Hebrew, he called to them. He summoned the light and said, this is what your job is. He called to the light and summoned it to the darkness and said, this is your job. This is what you're to do. And for me, it put a whole different layer on that.
That is fascinating. And I bet that a lot of people don't get that in the translation, that he called to them. He had summoned them, the darkness and the light.
Yes, summoned. Yeah. So I want to ask you a question. It says at the end of each day, it was evening and it was morning, and that constituted a day. But yet we call a day totally different. We start our day, well, typically at midnight, from midnight to midnight. We call that a day. So, what are your thoughts on why a day would start in the evening and that from the evening to the morning would be considered a day?
Well, I don't know why, but I did hear some people talking about it. And I don't know if this was a midrash or if it was, I don't know where it came from. I didn't get a source, but it was just talking about the different points of view as to how we view life. So generally, the world thinks of a day as you get up in the morning and you start your day. So everything's good. It's daylight. everything's nice and happy, and then you go to bed at night and it gets dark and it's sometimes scary at night. But here, the difference is that even though the day ebbs and flows, you've got the night and then you've got the day and then you've got the night and then you've got the day. The thinking here is what I've heard is that even after there's darkness, you will always have light. So if you
Oh,
start your day in darkness, don't worry, you will always have light.
oh,
It's
that's
just a
good.
different point of view on how an outlook on life.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I like that a lot. Um, Something else that you and I actually have talked about before is, and we learned this from Rabbi Avner, one of our teachers here at NETIV, that at the end of each day we noticed that he said, it is good. And Rabbi Avner has pointed out to us that at the end of each day, God judged the day. And he looked at that day, what he had done, and if it had something that would be useful on the next day, he called it good, and that was carried over to the next day. If something were not useful for the next day, then it did not carry over. It's he judged the day, and I have thought when I first heard that from Rabbi Avner, I thought at the end of my day, when I'm going to bed and I've said my prayers, does God judge me at the end of that day? And then does he decide whether I have something to contribute to the next day? And he allows me to wake up. And just makes me think how important it is to look at how we're living the day. When this day is over, how will it be judged?
That's a very good point. And I have heard Rabbi Avner talking about this before. I have also heard that if you think of all of the deeds in the world at any particular moment being 50-50, you've got half of everything in the world is evil and half of everything in the world is good. And the next thing that you do tips the scale one way or the other.
Yes.
So make your choices very deliberately, thinking that, well, if I choose to do something that's not good, it's going to tip the scale of the whole world in a negative way. It kind of puts a little bit more pressure on each of our decisions.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I also thought, um, just my own curiosity has, I don't know if there's any discussion of this, but if God judged each day and whatever was good continued to the next day and what was not did not, I would like to know what did not make it. Just out of
Oh,
my
yeah.
curiosity, you know,
Yeah.
what did he judge that was not good enough to continue to the next day? Just curious.
Good question. I don't know that there's a way we could ever find that out. It's the I've heard before you can't prove a negative. So
Right.
how would we know what didn't if we don't even know that it was there to know that it didn't come across? So good points. There is just so much packed into every verse, into every word, in this amazing Torah that we have been given. But there was something that kind of is a little disturbing to me in these few verses and in verses following. We see division. He divided the light from the darkness. He divided the land from the waters. Um, to me, division can have a negative idea. we strive for unity in our relationships. We in our NETIV, we want to be united in one. We don't want a division in our groups. So on one level, it's like, how do we reconcile division with the idea of being united and one? Any thoughts on that?
I have a thought, but it's my own thought. I don't have any sources for this. But if you think of division as actually multiplication,
Oh, yeah.
so if you have one thing and you divide it, then now
Yeah.
you've got two things. So turn it into a little bit of a positive spin.
Very good. Yeah, I like that. Because we know there is nothing negative in the creation, because he did say everything was good. So yeah, I like that. It's increasing rather than it's a positive thing, not a negative thing. So yeah, I like that a lot. Um, the other thing I would like for us to talk about for a few minutes is the perfect order of creation. And we've heard in other lectures before that God provides the cure before there's even the illness. And we look at this, and everything was created and put in place before the thing that would need it was created. And that's kind of a roundabout way to say he created the oceans and the waters and then the fish. He created the dry land and the plants and the food before he put living creatures on it. So to me, if nothing else, that speaks to a divine creator behind everything. Things didn't just suddenly a molecule appeared and then this happened and this randomly happened and it all came together. The perfect order of the way the universe works and the way it perfectly is laid out in these first few verses speaks to me that there is a creator who is behind all of this and is still involved in it.
That's a that's another good point. I would also add to that that it 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 reassures me that whatever I need is already there. That
Right.
in this divine order, he provided what we need and it's there. We just have to find it.
Exactly. Yeah, there's pieces that we need to put together.
Yes.
The pieces are already there. We've talked before about using the analogy of a jigsaw puzzle, that all the pieces are there. We just have to put them together. And sometimes that can be very challenging. But we've got the box that's got the picture of what it's going to look like when it's all finished. And so we can use that as our pattern and put the pieces, and we might find two or three pieces that fit, but they don't fit anywhere else. And then as we get more and more pieces, then the picture starts developing. And I see that in our lives today, that we might have an isolated incident in our life, and we think, where did that come from? How does that piece fit in? So, what would be our box that says this is what it's going to look like? And I kind of see the Torah as that it's got everything laid out for us. And it says, if you follow this pattern, if you follow this, your pieces are going to fit together. It may take a while, will it take your lifetime for all of those pieces to fit together? But here's what it's going to be. And what a beautiful picture we have when we do that. It may look messy while we're in the midst of it.
Well, I have a puzzle on my table at the moment, a jigsaw puzzle, and I have a magnifying glass. I pick up a piece and I look at it in my magnifying glass to see exactly what that piece contains. And I think that's an analogy also of what we're doing, taking each reading and going through bit by bit and looking at it a little bit more in depth. these puzzle pieces here in the Torah with our magnifying glass.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes we get too caught up maybe in the big picture and don't look at the details. Take a moment to look at this moment, what's happening in this moment. But that brought
Okay.
up another question, Nancy. We were talking about how the perfect order of these first few verses are. And the Torah we know it's not always in chronological order, but that's beside the point. What I want to talk about. When we start studying the Torah, should we start at the beginning and go through, or just open a book and read a little bit here and read a little bit there? And to me, that would be like trying to put pieces together where we don't know how they fit. To me, it seems like there should be an order to how we read the Torah. I don't know if that made any sense or not, but
I think a lot of people, I think there are some people who will pick and choose and will take something out of context.
yeah,
And I do think it's important to start at the beginning and to read through, because you do get background information. You do understand what's going on as the stories unfold.
exactly, exactly. Well, Nancy, any other points that you want to make, or do we want to read a few more verses? We've got a few minutes left for this podcast, so you've got to read a couple more verses, or we stop on this one and pick up again next time.
I think this is a good stopping point because day 3 is next, and it's got a lot in it. It's got the
Okay.
dry land and the seeds and the fruit trees and all of the vegetation. So I think this would be a good stopping point.
Okay, I think so too. So we will put a pin in it at chapter 1, verse 9, and we'll pick it up next time. So this was fun, Nancy. Let's do this
Yes,
again.
absolutely.
Meet in Sarah's tent and see what we can unpack from these incredible verses. And whoever's listening to us after this is posted online, we appreciate your listening and hope you join us again in Sarah's tent.
See you next week in Sarah's tent.
Bye, Nancy.
Bye.